came and you said, turn over your economy to the crooks. Crooks are more efficient than governments. Crooks make the economy run. You're making us pay for this junk economic theory, and England is saying, yes, that's what we want, and if you don't want it, we're going to essentially isolate you and treat you like Cuba was treated for many years, or North Korea. We're going to make you the new North Korea of the North Atlantic. I think this is crazy of Europe to do, because Europe needs, Iceland has a critical geopolitical position in the world, and Europe doesn't care. Gordon Brown says, I don't care if you go to Russia. I don't care if you go to China. I don't care if you go to North Korea. You pay us or we're going to hurt you. That's the British position, and that's what neoliberal economics comes down to. Their idea of equilibrium is do what we want or we'll kill you. Essentially, it's your money or your life. That's equilibrium neoliberal style.
Now, there were more than simply Icelandic crooks involved in this iSave scam. There were Russians and Britons as well, right?
Yes. The details have all been spelled out in the Icelandic press. They hired Eva Joly, a French jurist, to head the prosecution. Only in the last few weeks, almost a year after the fact, have British serious fraud department begun to help Iceland track them down. Apparently the role of the British serious fraud agency is to protect serious frauds against governments trying to recover the money that fraudsters have stolen. Just like in America, if you know from the movies, what does the mafia do? It wants to have one of its own guys in the police department, preferably in the prosecutor's office, to protect them. Essentially, that's what Britain's position is. We're not going to help you recover the money. We're just going to make you pay our crooks.
Who financed the property bubble in Iceland?
Essentially, the banks and the pension funds financed it. They thought that Iceland was borrowing money basically from Japan in what was called the carry trade. Japan's bubble broke in 1990, and the banks essentially were pushed into negative equity when their property bubble collapsed. Land prices went down in Japan every single year for about 17 years, every quarter. So the government said, how are we going to let the banks earn their way out of debt? Well, we're going to just let the banks create unlimited amounts of money to lend abroad. So Japan banks would create credit in yen at about 0.25% or 0.5% and lend it out, and people would borrow at a very low percentage. Speculators and arbitrageurs would borrow yen at, say, 1%. They'd convert them into euros or dollars or sterling, and they'd lend to Iceland at 16%, so that by 2007, Iceland was paying 16% for foreign loans. And somehow the bankers thought that with the economy paying 16%, it could still make a profit buying property as long as property prices went up by more than 16% a year. And by 2006, Iceland, on paper, had the highest standard of living in the world. In other words, if you looked at its exchange rate, and it looked like the money that Icelanders were supposed to be getting as their currency rose, it seemed as if they were all rich. But what they really were doing was debt pyramiding. They were running into debt to bid up property prices, and they thought, gee, our property's going up in price. All we have to do is borrow yet more and buy yet more property, and as long as property prices go up at a faster annual rate than the interest rate we have to pay, we'll be rich in no time. Well, what happened after iSave happened? Gordon Brown wanted to grab all the Icelandic money last October that he could, so he used the anti-terrorist law. He said that Iceland, a country without an army, was essentially a terrorist using the legislation passed right after 9/11 in 2001. So branding Iceland as a terrorist, he grabbed all the Icelandic money that he could in Iceland to essentially use for himself to pay out depositors. All of a sudden, this caused the Icelandic currency to collapse by 18%. The mortgages that the Iceland home buyers and speculators had taken out were all in foreign currency. So the Icelandic currency that they were paid in, that they got their income in, and that they got their rents in were all paid in Icelandic krona, but the money they owed was in British sterling or euros that had gone up 18%. So all of a sudden, Icelandic property was pushed across the board into negative equity, and unemployment has spread. You can look at Iceland as a dress rehearsal for what would happen in the United States if the neoliberals and the creditor interests and Mr. Obama's planners get their way. Iceland became a creditor's paradise. The loans, not only did mortgagees have to pay the interest rate of about 5.5%, but they had to pay an extra premium for the decline in the price of the currency. So they had to pay an extra up to 18% penalty over and above the 5%. So the Icelandic homeowners and personal debtors were paying the highest interest rates of any developed country in the world, and they were going bankrupt. Emigration has already begun. Foreclosures have begun. I spoke to people there who were telling me about losing their homes, and other people have said, well, we haven't lost our home yet because we had savings that we accumulated, and we're running down our savings just so we don't get evicted. But obviously, this is a situation that can't go on, and you can imagine how upset the Icelanders were when England said, pay us or we won't let you join Europe. They've done polls now, and whereas most Icelanders had good thoughts about joining Europe as recently as last April when there were elections, now only about a third of Icelanders want to join Europe, and the proportion is falling very quickly now that it's clear that Europe isn't really the social democracy they had wanted, but a neoliberal country run by British creditors.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, Iceland recovering from neoliberal disaster. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. You say that no matter how much a government may tax its economy, there is a problem turning the money into foreign currency. Is that what you were referring to when you said that, when you talked about the Icelandic currency inflating?
Basically, yes, it's a very difficult concept for most people to grasp. The position by the International Monetary Fund and international creditors in England and Holland today and the IMF was to go to the Icelandic government and say, you really have to pay England. They're friends of ours. The government has to pay, and how can the government pay? By taxing its citizens. Well, the Icelandic parliament said, wait a minute, we can tax our citizens in the currency they're paid in, which is krona, our domestic currency, but how on earth are we going to pay debts that you denominate in euros and sterling, the almost 4 billion euros that we owe? If we take these domestic krona that we tax and we throw them on the foreign exchange market, that's going to flood the market with krona, and the foreign exchange is going to go down. So the more we tax, the less foreign currency we have because we have a foreign exchange collapse. Now, the only way ultimately that any economy can pay off its foreign debts is to export something to earn the foreign exchange to pay them. But Iceland only has one export that it earns foreign exchange from, and that's the codfish. It does have aluminum, which is made out of electricity that it provides, but it's made such bad contracts with Alcan and other aluminum companies that the aluminum companies have made huge loans to themselves, charge off all of the profits they make as if they were interest payments, claim that interest is tax deductible, so nobody can figure out what Iceland gets in exchange for its aluminum exports, if anything at all. The contracts are all secret. Part of neoliberalism is to have all contracts secret so that you can bribe people. The essence of neoliberalism is bribery of government officials and bribery of private officials off the balance sheet. So you make a contract that is a disaster for the company, a disaster for the bank, a disaster for the country, and you pay the person who signs this contract in some offshore banking center a special bribe, and then you go to the country and you say a contract is a contract. We have to have the sanctity of markets. The sanctity of markets under these conditions means bribery by whomever, by the World Bank, by the British authorities, by multinational firms that are cheating companies. So really, when you scratch the surface of neoliberal economic philosophy, Chicago School market equilibrium theory, what it comes down to is lawlessness and bribery and force. And that's what is being used for Iceland. So Iceland can say,